You may recall 2 days after Memorial Day, the weather was a little warmer, and we started all of this. Our groups were formed. We started looking at these proposed statutes. We focused on the science and how to communicate the science of the problems that we're addressing and the science of the solutions that were being proposed. And we spent the summer doing that and working together and learning how to work in groups and how to boil down all this complexity to these 10-minute briefings that we're going to be doing today. And you succeeded in doing that magnificently as a group. And so congratulations for that. And then we moved on in the fall semester to figure out how to make these bills real and to focus on the things that Master's of Public Administration students have to focus on, which was how do we put these things into place? How do we go from these statutes to programs? How do we go from these program designs to figuring out who's going to do the work, what the work is, how much it's going to cost? And that's what we're talking about today. How do we get these programs started? And you're doing something that's not typically done in public policy programs around the United States, where we're not only focusing on what we should do and the cost and benefits and all the rest, but how to do it. And in working on that, we've had to really focus very narrowly on the tasks that are involved in doing that work. And I know we're going to hear from 5 groups today that are going to knock your socks off, so I'm ready for that. Before we start, I want to also introduce one of our faculty members for next semester who is returning to us, Kathy Callahan, who's over here. Kathy, for a while, ran Region 2 of EPA and also helped run the Lamont Observatory for a few years, and has agreed to come back and help us advise one of the workshop groups in the spring semester. And so I think we will be focusing in the spring semester on taking all this group ability we have and focusing on helping clients. So without any more introduction, let's bring on the first group, Mina, to talk about the Energy Resilient Communities Act.
Amazing, thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Mina, and today I'm going to be presenting on behalf of the Energy Resilient Communities Act team. First, I'll set the foundation by discussing the problems in our current energy system in the US and consider if the Energy Resilient Communities Act can solve some of them. I'll take you through our proposed program design, a detailed view of the first year goals, and finally, we'll talk about how we'll measure success. Let's start by setting the scene. There isn't always consensus on the causes of extreme weather, but there are clear facts on the outcomes. In 2022 alone, the US witnessed more climate disasters than ever before. Over 800 people died as a result of these disasters. Our economy felt the burden of over $160 billion worth in damages. And our energy system can't keep up, with over 70% more power outages in 2022 than in 2019. In order to understand why we're experiencing so many more outages, we need to zoom into our current energy system. So firstly, most of our current grid was built in the 90s, when the population was much smaller and there were far fewer extreme weather events, meaning that there was less of a strain on the grid. In most cases, energy is generated very far away from where it's used. As you can see on the map, there are 3 sections to the grid in the US, meaning that energy is lost over long distances due to line congestion and resistive heating. And although everyone feels the impact of this outdated infrastructure, it's environmental justice communities that face the brunt of the inefficiencies. These groups are defined as low-income groups and people of color who are most susceptible to climate change. And these are the groups that spend the highest proportion of their income on energy bills. It's going to take years to update the whole of the energy infrastructure, and in the meantime, we'll lose countless valuable lives. An innovative solution to blackouts, particularly in vulnerable communities, is that of clean energy microgrids. A microgrid is the first step to us reaching a smart grid. It's a self-sufficient energy system capable of generating, storing, and distributing electricity. Unlike, as Professor Cohen might say, the stupid grid, which wastes huge amounts of energy. The fact that microgrids can be both connected to the main grid and work independently from it means that it provides both flexibility and reliability. The Energy Resilient Communities Act provides funding to make this solution a reality. It aims to empower vulnerable communities with $1.55 billion in annual grants to set up community-owned microgrids. It will include an educational outreach program and, in the process, create green jobs stimulating local economies. The bill aims to address 4 key problems shown below. Firstly, we want to increase communities' energy resilience in the face of natural disasters, so that's reducing the amount of blackout times communities face. Secondly, we want to increase community security, including the amount of money individuals pay for their energy bills. Thirdly, we want to encourage energy democracy by increasing community ownership and decision-making power over their energy infrastructure. And finally, the bill aims to reduce GHG emissions by using clean energy solutions. So before we move on to our program design, let's take a look at this idea in action. Blue Lake Rancheria is a federally designated tribal government and Native American community located in the extremely disaster-prone region of California. They've built a renewable energy microgrid that has achieved all the goals that we saw in the previous slide. They've reduced annual GHG emissions by 200 tons, which is the same as powering 35 homes for a whole year. They've reduced energy costs by $200,000 per year, and it's proved extremely successful in times of disasters already, increasing both energy resiliency and enhancing energy democracy. The wildfires in 2019 caused outages in 30 counties across California, but at Blue Ridge, the microgrid kicked in, protecting the local community and having spillover effect on surrounding communities, meaning that the Red Cross Evacuation Center and emergency services across surrounding communities in the area still had access to both power and emergency supplies. So how do we scale this solution across communities in the US? Our program design will give us a strategy to do exactly this. We've designed a 2-pronged approach. Ultimately, we want to adopt that bottom-up approach, which means that projects are designed and led by the community to encourage energy democracy and community empowerment, and so that the communities can tailor projects to their own specific needs and nuances. However, we do acknowledge that the system might take some time to get up and running. Communities need time to develop applications and apply, and the Department of Energy will need time to review and approve applications. So while this process takes place, for the first 2 years, the Department of Energy will provide the support needed to get this program up and running. We'll design projects and work with contractors to execute them, also providing a template and lessons learned for future projects. That's that bottom band there that you can see. This 2-pronged design will ensure that we get projects up and running at speed. It'll ensure that after the first 2 years, we can truly implement the bill's bottom-up, community-led decision-making focus, and will emphasize and prioritize environmental justice communities throughout both the bottom-up and top-down approaches. So how do we get this up and running in the first year? We first need to set the foundations and processes to ensure future projects run smoothly. In the first year, we'll define the organizational structure, set up the foundations for the grant application process. We'll complete an educational outreach program, ensuring that communities understand the full value of these projects. We'll choose a pilot project, and finally, we'll define the performance management and reporting structure. So that's a lot of work to get done. Who's going to do all of it? We've allocated 139 full-time employees from 5 key offices across the Department of Energy. We've picked the offices that are best suited to fill each task. For example, the Office of Public Affairs that you can see on the top right will handle educational outreach, and the Renewable Energy Office will conduct the program design. We've also assigned over 100,000 contracting hours to fill any resource gaps. So how will these activities be organized, and when will we get them done? We've divided the first year into 3 key phases. We're currently in phase 0, the first box that you can see on the slide. In this phase, we've defined how much budget we have. So the bill specifies that the total administrative budget is 2% of the overall annual budget. That gives us $31 million to work with in the first year. From January 2024, we'll move into the design phase, where we'll work primarily on designing the educational outreach. In phase 2, we'll conduct the educational outreach and provide applicants with assistance. And by the end of the year, we'll move into phase 3, where the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations will review and shortlist the first round of applications. Now that we've explored the details of our program design, let's shift our focus to how we'll gauge its effectiveness. We'll measure success across 3 buckets. In the first year, our metrics will measure the processes that we've set up in the first year. So that will include things like the number of projects approved, the number of projects approved in EJ communities, and the amount of funding that's allocated to each project. Once our projects are up and running, we'll measure their direct outputs, which includes stuff like the reduction of energy prices, an increase in clean energy generation, and the number of microgrids that we've constructed. And finally, once each project is up and running for at least a year, we can measure its outcomes or the knock-on effects that it has to the wider community. That's stuff like the reduced number of blackouts, the reduced greenhouse gas emissions, and any outage-related deaths, injuries, and economic losses like we saw in the first example. So I've thrown a lot of information at you today, but I want you to take 3 key things away. Firstly, our outdated energy infrastructure can't accommodate our needs, and the Energy Resilient Communities Act can provide a reliable solution while we wait for the wider infrastructure to improve. In the first 2 years of the project, we require a flexible program design with the Department of Energy playing a more hands-on role. And once the projects are up and running, we'll shift to a bottom-up approach, giving communities the agency to design and lead their own clean energy microgrid projects, empowering them to remain resilient in the face of disasters, as well as supporting surrounding communities, just like we saw in the example of Blue Lake Rancheria. I'd like to end by acknowledging the whole team for all their amazing work over the last 2 semesters. Professor Dr. Cohen for his support as our faculty advisor, Ariane and Vincent as our managers and deputy managers, and the whole of the rest of the team. Thank you so much for listening. Are there any questions?
Silence. Oh, there's a question. You have a mic over there?
Thank you very much for I just wanted to ask you, what do you anticipate to be the the biggest challenge of implementing this bill?
Yes, that's a really good question. So I think we spoke a lot about the, if I go back to the implementation, we spoke a lot about kind of the organizational structure and the practical implementation of the bill. But I think the point that will be really important and what we're focusing most on in the first year is this educational outreach piece. I think we really require a shift in culture and almost like a storytelling implementation in order to convince communities of the benefits of microgrids and also reduce the sense of suspicion that people have towards new technology and also towards climate change. In Texas is a state that we've talked about in previous examples, and it's also a state where, for example, ESG is illegal. So I think there's a huge cultural piece around convincing people that this is a viable solution to actual problems that they face, and also giving them a neutral language to talk about climate change through that isn't politicized or stigmatized. So I think that educational outreach, how we design that, will be really important.
And do you expect that the microgrids will be more resistant to the weather perturbations that we're having while you're waiting for a better infrastructure?
Yes, definitely. So the benefit of a microgrid is that it can both connect to the main grid and disconnect from it. So when the problems with the main grid are that it's so large and connected to that whole, like the whole of the east of the US. So if there's one flaw in it, then it kind of shuts off the electricity for everybody in that area, whereas the microgrid can then kick in, turn on, and any energy that it's stored in it already can be used in that time, and it can disconnect from the main grid in the meantime, making sure that the energy stays on, basically, when the main grid fails.
So our second briefing will be focused on the Water Quality and Environmental Innovation Act. And if you're ready, let's begin.
Hi, everyone. Okay, tech issues are not the only problem we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about something else now. Water, exactly. Oh, I think I have to use these. This is Lake Okeechobee in southern Florida. Once home to a thriving ecosystem and a popular swimming spot for kids, this lake is now covered in an overgrowth of harmful algae in a phenomenon called eutrophication. Houston, we have a problem. Eutrophication is just one of many threats to water quality that affects water bodies in the US today. Sea level rise and coastal erosion are threatened to impact almost 30% of the US's current population. Ocean acidification threatens marine ecosystems across the shorelines, and studies say that there is no water body in the country today that is free from microplastics. The problems that affect water quality issues in the US are complex, and they take on many forms. They affect the physical makeup, the chemistry, the biology, and the structure of water bodies themselves. How do we solve such a complex web of water quality threats? We need solutions that use the most cutting-edge tools that we have as a species, the most innovative technologies that could address water quality solutions from a holistic perspective. Now, there is a growing body of solutions of these kinds, solutions that have found innovative ways to either harness emerging technologies or use nature-based solutions to address critical water quality issues. For example, companies have been using tech-based solutions like artificial intelligence to monitor water quality. Engineering solutions like nanotechnology have been used to solve really hard-to-solve problems like the cleanup of microplastics. Nature-based solutions, for example, living seawalls are being used to protect coastlines from soil erosion in ways that allow marine ecosystems to live. So there is a thriving world of innovation out there looking to solve these issues, but the problem with a lot of these solutions is that they are vastly underfunded by private markets. They lack the resources needed to be deployed and scaled up effectively. So how can we overcome this market gap? One potential solution is the proposed Water Quality and Environmental Innovation Act. This is a policy solution that attempts to help these organizations by providing them with this critically needed funding. With a budget of about $23 million in grant money a year, this bill would allow the Environmental Protection Agency to offer grants and contracts to organizations that are working in this space. And since innovation can come from many places, this money is open to organizations of all kinds, including for-profit startups, as well as, of course, nonprofits and research institutions. Every year, the EPA will solicit proposals from organizations working on critical water quality issues, evaluate which ones stand out as innovative, as they are using innovative technologies and they're really working on key water quality threats, and then curate grants or contracts for these selected companies or organizations. An important part of the program design is that the greatest emphasis at every step is placed on impact. Now, going back to Lake Okeechobee, Suppose we have a hypothetical startup called Company X. Company X is using an AI-based monitoring tool to tackle the root cause of eutrophication, which is the runoff of nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen into lakes and ponds. They measure the content of these nutrients in real time and then using AI map potential sources of contamination nearby. So they're using an innovative technology. They have successfully executed a pilot project as well that was able to identify and stop the cause of eutrophication in another local lake. So assuming Company X approaches the EPA for funding through this bill, it would then be evaluated along a set of criteria anchored towards performance. Priority is given in the evaluation process to solutions that address relevant threats in innovative ways, as Company X has been doing, have demonstrated impact as seen through their pilot project, and also solutions that show potential for scalability. Company X's tool is small, very cost-effective, and can be easily deployed at scale. So overall, Company X is a good fit for this program. Let's say Company X is approved for funding. How would it receive this funding and how much? Now, the impact focus of the program design doesn't just factor into project evaluation, but also into the budget allocation process. Because it's already tested its technology out, Company X is eligible for the highest chunk, or up to 70% of the annual funding, as the budget allocation structure reserves the highest proportion of funds for solutions that are already at a close-to-market stage. And again, keeping in line with being impact-driven, not all of the allocated funds would be given to Company X upfront. Instead, only a certain percentage, about, let's say, half the total grant amount, would be given to Company X initially, and the remaining half would be dispersed once Company X has reached a target on some predetermined key performance indicator. And the intent of this process, of course, is to ensure that there is continued demonstration of impact at every step along the way. Now, this is easy in theory, but in practice, measuring impact is not an easy task. Since the projects that this bill will support are taking on very specific issues or doing things in very niche ways, we can't have a single set of indicators to measure all the projects under. What we can instead have is some general environmental and social objectives that the program would want to see, which are reduced pollution, and as a result of that, community well-being and thriving ecosystems. And to align with federal objectives around justice, we want to have more community inclusion and engagement in the process. And using these broader objectives as guides, the EPA can work with each beneficiary then to develop more targeted KPIs for that process. Though this process is laborious and not easy, it's not easy to work with each company to develop specific metrics, data gathering and measurement is a very important part of this bill. The bill mandates that every organization report its progress and make all its data freely available to the government. So by integrating that knowledge exchange process earlier on in the program design, the EPA can have agency over what data is collected, how it's collected, and how it's reported. And this is very important because a great benefit of this program is that it would give the EPA access to data that it would otherwise not have access to, specifically data at more local scales or along metrics that the EPA otherwise wouldn't have tracked. This would help the EPA iterate its own operations at addressing crucial water quality issues and solve problems it hasn't been able to solve before. Like, for example, the EPA has not yet been able to solve the problem of eutrophication in Lake Okeechobee in a significant way, and the data from this project might help them do that. But once impact has been measured, the next question is, how can it be managed? How do we know that the solutions that the EPA funds are indeed solving the right problems in a way that really leads to long-term change? Because the individual success metrics themselves don't tell us a story of how the program as a whole will perform. It's important for the EPA to have a clear system to consolidate all of these metrics together and define some sort of clear criteria for success. In this case, in the case of this bill, if more than 75 of a project's specific metrics improve after the disbursement of the grant money, the project would be considered successful. A clearly defined dashboard like the one on the screen, which synthesizes this overview of success of the individual success metrics with potentially a process of being able to predict future success, would be able to help the EPA iterate its evaluation criteria and budget allocation decisions over the course of the program so it can lead to the most effective allocation of resources on its part. Now, it's important to note that this bill is only a very small dent in a very big problem. $23 million is very little money for funding tech and engineering-heavy solutions. Why is it relevant then that we even have such a bill? Because of the importance of the problem that it's trying to solve and the way it's trying to solve them. Most of these solutions represent a departure from how things are currently done at a federal level. So the bill is in some way a way to test the waters, pun intended, for how we can use innovative technologies to address critical water quality problems in the US. So in summary, a company like Company X may not be able to solve the problem of eutrophication nationwide, but even helping one Lake Okeechobee would change many lives for the better and lead us a little bit closer to this goal. By funding Company X and other such organizations that the bill's budget can allow, the EPA can start to tackle this massive problem of water quality in the US drop by drop. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. Before we end, I'd like to thank my task team, Shabi, Yugratna, and Sophie, as well as our entire team for their incredible work over the last 6 months. I'd also like to thank Professor Cass for guiding us every step of the way through this semester. Thank you. Any questions?
Hi. Yeah, first of all, I wanted to congratulate you for the presentation, but you mentioned something about $23 million, and I'm not sure where that came from.
Right. The funding for this bill is sort of tied to the revenue that is collected from another program called the Motor Vehicle and Engines Compliance Program, and we had a meeting where a call with the representative of Byron Donalds, who is one of the proponents of this bill in Parliament, and they said that the revenue they collected from this program this year was about 23 million. So it is a varied budget depending on the revenue collected from that program. So that's where the 23 million comes from.
Hey, thank you for that presentation. It was clearly very thoroughly thought through, so really appreciated that. I just had a question around the disbursement process. I know that you, the team came up with an idea to pay as you go kind of thing, like where key performance indicators, once they're met, then the funding is released. I just wanted to know whether the team considered about the equity consideration specifically. Like smaller companies usually find it harder to find funding upfront. So is there a consideration for that?
Absolutely. I think that that has also factored into the evaluation criteria and how much funding we give a little bit. So this bill is trying to support companies that have already gotten some amount of private funding and just need a little bit more to get out into the market. So it is favoring those kinds of companies over the very small companies, just because the bill wants, this program design kind of wants to make sure that the money that it's putting in, because it has very little, is kind of leading to, they want the technology to be proven. So yes, sometimes a small company can have, demonstrated impact and therefore be eligible for for this program or be a kind of project that the bill would want to support. And I think in that case, it would really depend company to company. So this program design, the funding disbursement process is sort of a very general overview. If the company only needs 50% of the funds to be able to deploy its technology, that's how much we would give them. If it needs 90% of the initial grant money to be able to deploy its technology, or 100%, it would really depend on the company. But this is the overall intent of the program design in general, just to make sure that we keep the impact focus and we kind of favor companies that have already gone through the private sector fundraising process and have a good product and just need a little bit of help getting to the other side.
So our third briefing for today is on the Don Young Restoration Grants for Coastline and Fisheries Act. And Cristina, are you ready? Okay. Please give your briefer your undivided attention.
can hear me okay? Yeah, great. All right, good morning. My name is Cristina Rocca, and today I'll be presenting the final briefing on the Don Young Restoration Grants for Coastlines and Fisheries Act, also known as HR 1196. I'd like to thank my output team for their support in putting this presentation together, as well as the broader workshop team and our advisor, Professor McCadney. I'm going to begin by sharing some background on the problems that led to the introduction of the Coastlines and Fisheries Act. I'll then give an overview of the bill and its main priorities. Finally, I'll cover our team's plan for the design, implementation, and impact management of the grant program before wrapping up. Today, U.S. coastlines and aquatic systems are in jeopardy. Anthropogenic activities have led to coastal and floodplain degradation, water pollution, overfishing, the destruction of marine habitats, and the climate crisis. These dire environmental problems also have adverse economic and social implications. Hurricane Sandy, the aftermath, which is pictured here, caused almost $70 billion in damages, hurting communities, fisheries, and tourism. The scope of these problems is significant, and that brings me to the legislation at hand. HR 1196, the Don Young Restoration Grants for Coastlines and Fisheries Act. This bill is a bipartisan piece of legislation that was introduced in the House earlier this year. It calls for the creation of a grant program, which is administered by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, which would distribute $1 billion in grants per year over the course of 10 years. While the bill itself is quite brief, it calls for the prioritization of projects which would stimulate the economy, employ fisherfolk, protect wildlife areas, and help underserved communities. It also prioritizes shovel-ready projects which can get off the ground quickly, including those with necessary permits in hand. The environmental problems facing our coastlines are also economic problems, so it's fitting that the grant administrator, NOAA, falls under the U.S. Department of Commerce. As an agency, NOAA is involved in a wide range of activities, from regulating fisheries to studying climate change. NOAA also has a number of existing grant programs, many of which receive far more applications than they can fund. A 2013 study that followed a coastal restoration grant program administered by NOAA found that there were an average of 17 jobs created per $1 million spent, significantly higher than industries like oil and gas. Now, to transition to our grant program framework, I'll be covering the following items in the next section, starting with our grant project objectives. In this semester's workshop, our program design is built around distributing funds which most effectively address the environmental problems mentioned earlier. This is reflected in our decisions around the program budget, staffing, and performance metrics. Given the specific language from the bill, projects eligible for our program will restore habitats, protect aquatic resources, stimulate the economy, and/or promote climate change adaptation. We believe the decisions we made around our program design will put NOAA in the best position to select and monitor projects that ensure grant dollars spent most effectively meet these goals. Eligible projects can come from U.S. coastlines, the Great Lakes, and island territories. With that said, we've split these areas into 6 regions and allocated target dollar amounts to each of them, based on the unique problems facing each region. Here you can see the budget allocation breakdowns for year 1. Because our program is $1 billion per year, staffing, travel, and overhead represent a fairly small piece of the pie. But this does cover 34 new full-time positions with benefits. In addition to setting regional targets, we have a firm commitment to ensuring 40% of the grant funding distributed goes to disadvantaged communities. This is in line with the Biden administration's Justice 40 initiative, which defines disadvantaged as communities that have been marginalized, underserved, or overburdened by pollution. We are going to staff our program to support reaching this 40% goal by emphasizing outreach and technical assistance. Because this is a 10-year program, we have the opportunity to build relationships with community groups and municipalities that may not otherwise proactively apply for a grant through NOAA. Our full-time outreach staff will share information on the grant program virtually and travel to their designated regions. We also have a robust technical assistance staff that can advise applicants on best practices through each step of the application process. These staff will sit under the Federal Program Officer, a new position that will be housed under NOAA's existing grants officer to help build capacity for program oversight. We will also be hiring 9 review specialists who have a depth of experience in either environmental, economic, or social criteria for grant programs. The highest level of reporting for all of these roles is to NOAA Administrator Richard Spinrad. Our 6-step grant timeline starts from the applicant portion of the grant process. After an initial letter of intent, organizations will be invited to apply through the Grant Enterprise Management System. After the application is submitted, it will be reviewed and awards will be announced. NOAA will distribute funds, and any technical assistance needed will take place at this time. Throughout the duration of the project, there will be monitoring and evaluation, which allows for performance management. Lastly, internal reviews will be conducted on a periodic basis. In measuring success, we investigated and analyzed a sample of solutions and relevant grant projects with potential for funding approval. We also identified and built out key performance indicators, referred to as KPIs, to address metrics for success. The Middle Peninsula in Virginia faces the highest rates of sea level rise on the East Coast. Seawater is increasingly flooding marshes and coastal wetlands, threatening local oyster and fishing industries. NOAA granted $1 million to the Mattapony Indian Tribe and Reservation to restore shorelines and habitats along the Mattapony River, many of which are on tribal reservation lands. With the goal of strengthening natural infrastructure, this project would be measured in terms of resilience capacity to climate hazards for communities along the river, as well as the restoration of natural habitats. In the U.S. Virgin Islands, coral reefs are a critical ecological asset. They support marine ecosystems, encourage tourism, and protect the islands from severe storm surges caused by climate change. Coral bleaching plagues the coral in the Virgin Islands. This occurs when ocean conditions like temperatures change, and the coral expels algae living in their tissues, leaving them stressed and subject to mortality. This year, NOAA awarded the Nature Conservancy $6.6 million to restore 90 acres of coral reefs in St. Croix. The project uses coral outplants from donor corals that have survived bleaching events in order to increase genetic diversity and support the reef's resilience to climate change. Guided by the goal of restoring marine habitats, this project could reestablish up to 5 threatened coral species in the Virgin Islands. Finally, NOAA has awarded $260,000 to Hawaii Pacific University to remove derelict fishing gear from sensitive habitats around the Hawaiian Islands. Importantly, this project also provides outreach and financial incentives for commercial fishermen to bring in discarded gear that they encounter during their regular fishing operations. In order to promote resilience in coastal communities, a potential progress measurement of this project, jobs created, would count towards an economic KPI. The removal of harmful gear would demonstrate progress in the environmental dimension. Grant reporting and program feedback is broken down into 4 key areas of measurement: operational, environmental, economic, and social. Deliverables will be used to analyze program success in annual reviews and 5-year evaluations. As noted in the sample solution, successful projects are able to incorporate and ensure progress in these key parameters. The issues addressed by HR 1196 have been underfunded relative to need, and such a large-scale program is long overdue. We sought to construct a grant program which can accommodate the great diversity of projects which are possible under the Coastlines and Fisheries Act. By emphasizing targeted outreach and technical assistance, we believe our proposed grant program framework provides a model through which the objectives of the Justice 40 initiative can be met. A robust monitoring and evaluation system for both the overall program as well as individual projects will allow us to keep track of progress and course correct when needed. We are confident that our proposal for the design and administration of this grant program will allow it to fulfill the critical goals and priorities established by the Don Young Restoration Grants for Coastlines and Fisheries Act. Thank you. Oh, this whole 2 semesters I've bombarded y'all.
Hey, great presentation. I just had a quick question on how you decided to allocate the budget between the 6 regions that you identified. What were the criteria for determining which regions should get more?
Sure. So I will just start by saying that these are targets and that they are subject to change based on feedback and progress measurement through the first year. I believe it was initially decided based on shoreline, like the measurement of the shorelines. So we just, and oh, it was the measurement of the shoreline accompanied with the amount that it could take to implement projects in that specific region. And so that's how we sort of divided it up. But there are regions that after the first year could very well have more applicants or more potential projects for funding.
The fourth briefing for today is on the Agricultural Resilience Act of 2023. And our presenter, your colleague who deserves your attention, is Emma. Please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Emma Oonk, and I'm excited to present to you today the 2 programs that our team designed for the Agriculture Resilience Act of 2023. So today's agenda will start with looking at the environmental problem that we are dealing with today. Then we'll look at the legislation that was introduced to combat this problem. Then we'll look at our first program that we designed called Innovation Grants, and then we'll look at our second program called the Food Waste to Energy Grants. So as we're looking at how agriculture and environmental degradation are related, there are really 2 sides to this issue. First, agriculture is a main victim of climate change as it relies heavily on land, water, and other natural resources that climate change affects. However, it is also a major contributor to climate change through soil degradation and greenhouse gas emissions. So we explore these 2 sides of the issue today. One of the ways climate change is threatening agriculture productivity is through increased occurrences of climate extremes, such as extreme temperatures, flooding, droughts, and wildfires. For example, in the United States in 2022, 3/4 of farmers saw a reduction in their yields due to drought, and 33% of orchard farmers around the nation had to remove their trees due to a lack of water, and this was especially felt in more drought-prone states such as California, where 50% of their orchard farmers had to remove trees, as pictured here. So we know agriculture is highly vulnerable to climate change, but it's also a heavy emissions industry. Agriculture is responsible for 11% of greenhouse gas emissions in the US, which is the 5th most polluting sector, completely out of proportion with the size of the agriculture industry, less than 1% of GDP. Main sources of emission come from methane from livestock and manure management, nitrous oxides from fertilizer, and carbon from loss of soil organic matter and operating machinery. So here is where the Agriculture Resilience Act steps in, providing a host of solutions to not only make agriculture more resilient to climate change, but also curb its contribution to climate change. The act was introduced in March of 2023 by Representative Shelley Pingree, a Democrat from Maine and an organic farmer herself. And the bill was also introduced twice before in 2020 and 2021, but it was not passed due to lack of bipartisan support. However, the hope is that components of this legislation will be integrated into other agriculture policy, such as the Farm Bill, a large legislative package coming up for renewal next year. So the goal of the act is to reduce agriculture's net greenhouse gas emissions by half by 2030 and to net zero by 2040. It looks at doing this through research, soil health, farmland preservation, pasture-based livestock, on-farm renewable energy, and food loss and waste, with each section having their own set of goals. This is a very large bill, so we will, for purposes of our program design, we will focus on grant program for soil health and a grant program for food loss and waste. The first program we're going to talk about today is the On-Farm Conservation Stewardship Innovation Grants, which is a long name, so I refer to it as Innovation Grants. And our second program we will talk about is grants for composting and anaerobic digestion food waste to energy projects, which I'll refer to as food waste to energy projects. So first, the Innovation Grants Program builds upon the Conservation Stewardship Program that's already in place under the United States Department of Agriculture, under the Natural Resources Conservation Service, acronym is NRCS. And this program has already proven extremely successful, helping farmers like Bruce Williams, pictured here from Iowa. So Bruce initially focused his first contract on reducing soil erosion through planting cover crops and no-tilling, and he saw results within 5 years. His second contract with the NRCS is now looking at how to improve soil nutrients, reduce nutrient runoff through multi-species cover crops, and planting pollinator habitats. Bruce, like many other farmers, is not only a conservationist, but a good businessman, and the financial health of his farm is something he's been able to secure through using conservation practices and the Conservation Stewardship Program. So the goal of the Innovation Grant Program is to help more farmers like Bruce and provide them technical assistance to farmers to improve their land health, really focusing on encouraging new ways to farm sustainably. These grants will last 5 years, and they will be evaluated in 2 different categories: those related to crops and those related to livestock. This program will be also run by the Natural Resources Conservation Service, like I mentioned, and the grants will be managed by the existing USDA offices around the country. Looking at the oversight and organizational structure more closely, the Innovation Program Director sits under the NRCS, reporting to the Deputy Chief of Programs at a national level, and each regional office has 2 to 4 program managers depending on the size of the office, reporting to the director with program associates to support at each office. The program staff also works very closely with the local offices and the technical support agents, who are the ones actually visiting the farms, conducting site visits, and working with them on their projects. Our staffing plan only focuses on the high-level program staff here because the expanded Conservation Stewardship Program is so large that they have more insight into the local staffing level. The total budget for the Innovation Grant Program is $200 million annually, which our team decided as it was not stipulated in the bill. The proposed legislation expands the Conservation Stewardship Program from a $1 billion grant program to a $4 billion grant program. So we decided to take 5% of this amount for the new Innovation Grant Program, leaving 95% for implementation of the rest of the expanded Conservation Stewardship Program. 57% of the budget is for technical assistance, as a lot of the on-farm innovation will be supported by the staff I mentioned in the last slide. 40% is for the grants, which are the direct payments to the farmers, and then 3% is for the administrative costs. Looking at how we plan to monitor performance for the innovation grants, we evaluate team management performance through an administrative report twice a year. We will look at how the program is meeting metrics quarterly in a program implementation report. And finally, we'll do a summary report evaluating the program objectives on a deeper level and how the program is moving towards larger goals of the bill, like reducing emissions. Next, we are going to look at the food waste to energy program, starting off with an example of a farm already doing this really well. So Barway Farm was founded in 1919. It's a 5th generation, 600-acre dairy farm located in Massachusetts. And they are committed to sustainability and high-quality dairy products while also keeping their family farm business profitable. So they accomplish these goals using an anaerobic digester, which turns waste into energy, heat, and fertilizer. They use 100 tons of organic waste daily that arrives from the community on trucks from local businesses and manufacturers, and the leftover digestate is used as fertilizer and animal bedding. This was a $4 million project, to give you an idea of the size, and funding came from various sources, including a $335,000 grant from the USDA. So the goal of the Food Waste to Energy Grant Program is to increase the number of these anaerobic digester construction projects like Barway Farm that are focused on food waste and not just manure. These grants are a mix of small and large, including 4 large grants of $10 million, 8 medium-sized grants of $5 million, and 18 smaller grants of $1 million. This program is run by the National Institute of Food and Agriculture located under the USDA, and these grants will also be managed by the existing regional offices. For these grants, the budget is allocated in the bill at $100 million annually, and there are only 30 grants to issue annually, so a much smaller staff can handle this, only 2% of admin costs. The Food Waste to Energy Program Director sits under NEFA. I won't go through the whole org structure since we saw that with the other program, but there are 1 to 2 regional division managers and 2 to 4 program associates, depending on the size of the office. Looking at how we plan to monitor performance, we will look at team management and an administrative report once a year, and then we'll also look at how the program is meeting metrics annually in a program implementation report that will start in year 2 after the program is established. Looking at the timeline, both grants follow a similar structure. The first half of the year will be spent recruiting for new positions and establishing the program priorities and grant criteria. The third quarter of the year will be focused on the application process, such as conducting outreach and evaluating submitted grant proposals. And the last quarter of the year will be focused on sending out the grant money, reviewing the yearly performance, and planning the following year's grants. The first year of the program won't have as robust of an evaluation phase as it's just getting started, but years 2 and onward will follow a similar timeline, though the program staff will only have to fill any vacant positions rather than hiring a whole new staff. To conclude, the Agriculture Resilience Act tackles both the emission side of agriculture and the resilience that's needed in the face of climate change. The Food Waste to Energy grants aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from food waste with 30 new projects annually, and it improves local energy security through biogas production. The innovation grants aim to inspire and support novel conservation methods that will restore the health of the land and sequester carbon through better land stewardship. These are just 2 very small portions of a much larger bill that's addressing a very ambitious goal. These programs will illustrate how sustainable projects do work and financially benefit farmers and their yields, increasing buy-in and stimulating further private investment. Thank you so much for your attention today, and a huge thank you to Professor Palmer and our great team behind this work. I'm now happy to take any questions.
Really lovely. This might be too detailed a question, but I was curious where the energy from that bio-waste on-farm operation, did it go back into the community, or did the farm benefit solely from that production of biogas?
Yes, great question. So Barway Farm is now completely run on the energy that's produced from that biodigester. And they have also created kind of their own separate business model for the energy, and they're looking at how they can distribute some of that energy to the surrounding community.
Great presentation, Emma. I'm just curious, this is maybe getting into the details, but you, in the grant, or in the innovation grants, there's like a wide range of potential funding amounts, and then you provided an example that was like in the 3 to 6 million range, I don't remember. But I was just wondering, like, do you foresee that those, like even a small grant like 1 million would be able to cover an entire project, or is it like more based on the size of the farm? Like, how did y'all basically decide those divisions and then the percentages that you wanted to allocate to them?
Yeah, are you talking the food waste to energy, the biodigesters, or the?
Yeah, like it was right, it was 1-2 slides, the biodigesters, and then you went into the different
So that
types.
one was 4 million. The average biodigester costs $400,000 to $5 million, depending on the size of the project and the technology used. So we did try to give them a wide range of grant money, depending on the size of the farm and the scalability. So $1 million as a small grant is generally should be good for most smaller scale biodigesters.
Yep.
Our final briefing is focused on the New York City Local Law 10, right? And if you're all ready, I think our briefer is ready.
Right, good morning, everyone. My name is Vasu Jayanthi, and I'm honored today to be presenting the final briefing on behalf of the Local Law 10 workshop group. Going to begin by contextualizing the environmental problem that our bill seeks to address, and then we'll get into Local Law 10, its goals, and the structure and logistics of the program that we've built around it. Then we're going to go through a sample task in the program to see how it would play out on the ground, and then we'll finish with some key takeaways. So we all remember how just 2 months ago we saw large parts of our city's infrastructure overwhelmed by rainfall, which led to severe flooding. Several subway lines stopped operating, and in some places people were up to their waists in contaminated stormwater. The parts of the city that were most affected lie in what the city refers to as environmental justice areas, which they define as low-income or minority communities living in the city. And one such community that was particularly affected by this flooding was The Hole, a 12-block area located on the border between Brooklyn and Queens. The Hole received 7 inches of rain on September 29th, nearly double the area's monthly rainfall, leading to building damages and preventing vehicle access. This low-lying area was once an industrial area that was built on top of an old salt marsh, but it's since been haphazardly converted to a residential area, and so it's not connected to either of the city's main stormwater drainage systems. Most of the Hole's 4,500 residents are racial minorities, and 22% of them live under the poverty line, making this an environmental justice area according to the city's definition. The area is also particularly sensitive to the urban heat island effect, where dark urban surfaces absorb heat and re-radiate it, making cities hotter than their surroundings. The Hole is just one of many communities in New York that stands to benefit from investments in stormwater and heat mitigation. New York City has identified 1,290 environmental justice areas, shown in blue on the map here. Many of them faced severe flooding on September 29th, as rainfall greatly exceeded the amount of water that existing drainage systems are equipped to handle. And this won't be the last time that New York City communities see this kind of flooding, with climate change expected to cause more severe and frequent storm events in coming years. And one way that New York City has been working to combat environmental issues and build up its resilience to climate change is through urban green infrastructure, also known as UGI, which includes structures like bioswales and small parks. UGI is a major pillar of Plan YC, which is the citywide sustainability initiative first launched in 2007. That led to 2012's $3.5 billion green infrastructure program, and in 2017, the city also passed Local Law 60 and 64 to help incorporate environmental justice into city-led initiatives. So now, Local Law 10 of 2023 builds upon those existing policies. It was passed unanimously by the New York City Council in January, and it directs city agencies to survey opportunities for new UGI in city-owned vacant lots, with the goals of generating data that can help expand residents' access to UGI, particularly in underserved communities, improving the city's water and air quality, and reducing its heat burden. Local Law 10 sets the stage for future deployment of UGI, like the examples that are shown up here. Such installations can complement traditional gray infrastructure like sewers and storm drains to help mitigate the environmental problems that communities like The Hole are experiencing. So to help structure the Local Law 10 program to be as effective as possible, we took the perspective of the city at the time that the bill was passed, and then we looked at the mandates of the bill. So it stipulates that the mayor's office should designate an agency to lead the Local Law 10 initiative. Out of the Department of Environmental Protection, the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, the Department of Transportation, and the Department of Parks and Recreation, we assume that the lead agency is going to be DEP because it's already led most of the city's UGI initiatives, including the Green Infrastructure Program. The remaining agencies will play a role in supporting the program. We then designated a process for prioritizing sites to be surveyed, which we're calling our environmental impact approach. This option calls attention to sites with the highest rates of environmental problems, where small UGI installations have the most potential to effectively address those problems. So assuming that our program begins immediately in 2023, we set up the first year in 2 primary phases. Phase 1, the initial review and identification of sites, takes place from January to April with time built in at the beginning for planning. And Phase 2, the site level analysis and reporting, that is the main survey itself, takes place from May to December. So Phase 1 contains 4 critical steps. First is forming the joint task force, which will be headed up from a new hire out of DEP, which is the Local Law 10 program manager. That's going to enable the consolidation of existing data on city-owned lots from agencies like DCAS and Parks. And then community involvement is an important part of environmental justice, and so we've made it an important part of our program design as well. So a key step in this phase is going to be surveying community members to better understand residents' desires for UGI. The data collected in all of those steps is going to inform the creation of a list of priority sites for more in-depth surveying in Phase 2, which also contains 4 critical steps. First is the collection of community-level data through community board meetings and town halls in priority sites that fall in environmental justice areas. Then we're going to have site-level collection of environmental and land use data leveraging existing city resources. That is the primary survey. And then all of that data is going to inform a draft report with recommendations around the potential for UGI in each priority site. After its completion in December, this draft report is going to be circulated for feedback before April 2024, when the final report must be submitted up to the mayor as mandated by the bill. So who is responsible for each of these steps? The organizational chart shown here reflects the key deliverables and who is involved in each task. So at the bottom of the hierarchy are officers and analysts from the 4 key agencies who are responsible for actually surveying the lots and compiling the environmental and land use data. They're going to report that data up to the Joint Task Force, which is a committee led by the local Law 10 program manager and responsible for overseeing the day-to-day operations of the program and coming up with priority sites and UGI recommendations. The Joint Task Force will send their recommendations to the next step up, which is the executive leadership team, which comprises the leads of the 4 key agencies, who will approve the program budget and calendar, and ultimately send the final report to the mayor's office, which will then review and circulate the final report in addition to overseeing the entire project. I do want to note here that besides the program manager, all of the scientists, analysts, agency leads, and other city staff who are working on local Law 10 are existing city employees, and so the personnel cost to the city is low. Moving on to funding, the total estimated budget for local Law 10 is $830,000, with about 3/4 allocated for staffing and 1/4 for other than personal services. This money draws from DEP's existing funding in addition to the expense budgets of the 3 other city agencies, as well as the large green infrastructure program budget, which means that local Law 10 overall poses a small fiscal impact on the city as well. So to illustrate a task in our program structure, let's take a look at the survey process for this vacant lot that's located in the hole. Our goal here is to survey this lot's environmental and land use characteristics to recommend specific UGI installations. In a place like the hole that doesn't have a proper stormwater drainage system, green infrastructure can provide an effective interim solution and reduce the burden on existing gray infrastructure. Specifically, a bioswale or rain garden that's pictured on the right here is a green space specially designed with plants and soil that can help to reduce flooding during storms by absorbing rainwater into the ground. In addition to managing stormwater, bioswales have the co-benefits of filtering out pollutants and beautifying a neighborhood, having positive impacts for residents' health. However, they can also collect trash and pests and lead to basement flooding if they're not properly implemented and maintained. So these are some of the considerations that our research analysts and scientists will be thinking about when they go to survey this lot during phase 2 of our program. They're going to be collecting data on variables such as the size of the lot, water volume capture, soil porosity and pH, and community needs in order to better understand the viability of installing a bioswale here. They'll then send that data to the Joint Task Force, who will make a final recommendation about UGI options that would be appropriate here, along with cost and feasibility considerations and the community needs and priorities. The survey data and recommendations will be captured in the final report, which will be circulated throughout the city next year, helping community advocates and local representatives to push for funding to install UGI that can address the environmental hazards that the whole faces. These are all issues that New York City holistically has to contend with: severe flooding, intense heat, and poor air quality among them. Events like the rainfall that we experienced on September 29th, the heat wave that we saw at the beginning of the semester, these will only become more frequent and more intense as climate change worsens. Investing in urban green infrastructure offers a localized and context-specific way to mitigate these problems while also supporting community needs and offering co-benefits for residents' health. UGI isn't going to solve every issue that communities are facing, but neighborhoods like the whole need this kind of investment as a starting point in order to avoid further environmental degradation and to ensure a livable community. Done using a thoughtful approach that incorporates both environmental and community needs, making sure that communities are involved throughout every step of the decision-making process, our program structure for Local Law 10 is a low-cost option that can produce valuable data to help plan future UGI and make our city more sustainable and more equitable. Thank you to the entire Leave It to Nature team for your support throughout the semester, and especially to our faculty advisor, Professor Rosen, our manager, Sonali, and our deputy manager, Jeremy. It's been a pleasure to work with you all for the past few months, and thank you all for your time. I'm happy to take questions now.
Vasu, excellent work to you and your team. As a native New Yorker, thank you so much for bringing so much attention to this very important issue. I wanted to ask you and your team, after 2 semesters of comprehensive work and analysis, what other neighborhoods besides the whole would you guys like to see prioritized for future UGI development?
So there's 1,290 environmental justice areas. So there are a lot of communities that would benefit a lot from this kind of support. Another neighborhood that we looked at in detail is Hunts Point in the South Bronx because of their extreme air quality and urban heat issues. Another one is southern Queens that has a lot of coastal flooding. It was devastated during Hurricane Ida. So those are the ones that come to mind immediately, but there's tons to be looking at. Thank you.
Well, first, let's congratulate all 5 briefers for excellent briefings. And I want to review a little bit of what we've learned and why we put you through all of this over the last 2 semesters. So I know that in many respects we focused on the content of these briefings, and they were really well presented. And in fact, one of the exercises of the past 2 semesters is to learn how to communicate very complicated problems and programs in 10 minutes. That is an extraordinarily important skill in a policy area like environment and sustainability, because these issues are complex, they require many disciplines communicating with each other, and the skill of bringing together a group to focus on these issues is one of the things that you have learned. These 2 semesters are as much about process as about the actual content, because we don't know what the next environmental problem is going to be, and you don't know which ones you're going to be working on. Now, next semester, we get much more small-scale policy problems and management problems to work on for clients. We don't get something as large as putting in place a new program. But by putting in place a new program, you get to think about every aspect of program management and policy analysis. What should we do? What's the issue? What's the science behind the issue? Now, the thing about environmental issues is inevitably there's a scientific dimension to it. And very often in this world of leaders who are scientifically illiterate, one of your jobs is going to be to explain the basic science. Every one of these briefings just did that. Now, you take it for granted because you've been doing it for the last 2 semesters, but somebody walking in off the street would not take it for granted. The other thing that you've developed over the last 2 semesters, and I give you all enormous credit for how well you've done this, is you've learned to work together in groups under tight deadlines and produce. Now, you're already in classes with other people that haven't gone through these processes. You're probably in some groups, and you're wondering, where's the work plan? Who's in charge here? How do we get this thing to happen? Why isn't everybody participating? Who are these free riders? What's going on around here? And so you have group skills and team skills that you should not underestimate that are very important. You also know how to structure work and think about work, which is another basic team management skill. So we've gone through these 2 semesters, working together, not always agreeing with each other, but somehow managing at the end of 2 semesters to produce what I would say are high-quality, excellent professional briefings that if you're in the world of work and you're doing this work all the time and you see these, you know, this is better than most of what you see professionally. Those of you who have had professional experiences, I think if you step back and compare this to the stuff you saw at work, this stuff's better, okay? I'm telling you, it's better. I do this all the time. You know, many of the faculty here do this all the time, and we're always impressed and amazed by how well you do when it gets to this point of the semester. So like I said, next semester will be different. We don't get to decide as much because it's the client that decides. The problems will be smaller scale and more focused, but the basic skills that you've learned in presentation and group dynamics and in work planning will hold and will be helpful to you. You have to design your own outputs going forward. In other words, we gave you that structure in the summer and fall. In the spring, you have to figure out what the outputs are. But the intellectual activity is you ask yourself, okay, what are the interim outputs before we get to the final report? And so that very exercise allows you to cut the problem down to size and actually start making the work happen. One of my favorite videos of our alums from the program is one of our alums is saying, well, my work life is like a series of workshop projects. That's what I do here. And that's really true. I mean, I feel that way about my work as a professional. It's like, where's the work plan? Who's the team? Who's in charge here? What's the deadline? When are we getting this stuff done? So don't underestimate how important that process is and what you now know how to do, and you've just demonstrated really effectively. So I want to congratulate you all on a job well done. The workshop faculty for the next semester has your survey results, and we have your top 10 list that Maya provided to us, and they're busy looking for projects that we hope will be interesting and important. The first day of workshop next semester, the faculty will present the projects to you. You'll get to rank order your preferences, and we're off to the races for next semester. So again, congratulations really on a job well done. Let's hear it for everybody.